As my niece and I settled in for a night of house sitting at my elder brother's place while he and his wife were away, a curious moment unfolded. Amid our lively discussions about our plans for the following day, my niece surprised me by indicating she was ready for bed. With swift determination, she slipped into the closet without hesitation, leaving me momentarily stunned. Hastily reaching out to stop her, I was met with a puzzled look. I'm Melissa, a 24-year-old housewife, and my brother, 5 years my senior, has always been a steadfast presence since we lost our parents early in life. Our bond remained strong even after we both married, and we continue to lean on each other for support. While my in-laws are wonderful, they reside in Alaska, making it challenging to rely on them for immediate assistance. As for my brother Sam and his wife, their union was hastily arranged after a clash with her parents, leading to an ongoing estrangement. With no nearby relatives to lean on, our bond of unwavering support flourished. It grew even stronger when Sam and his wife welcomed their daughter, closely followed by the arrival of a little girl into my own family 4 years later. Living in the same city, the daughters became inseparable, akin to true sisters. As the years passed and my niece Sarah approached her 10th birthday, Sam shared his plans for a special 10th wedding anniversary trip. "Melissa, would you mind looking after Sarah while we're away?" Sam's request came with a touch of hesitation. "It's just a short overnight trip nearby, but we thought it'd be nice to have some time alone." I readily agreed, eager to assist. When we discussed logistics and I inquired about picking up Sarah, Sam shook his head, indicating a different plan. It became clear he wanted me to stay over at their house with Sarah, concerned about leaving it unattended for security reasons. I playfully teased Sam about his excessive concern but eventually relented, opting to spend the night alone. I left my daughter, who still harbors some sleepover jitters, in the care of my husband. On the day of their anniversary getaway, I headed to Sam's house. Holding Sarah's hand, we bid farewell to her parents. She seemed a tad apprehensive as she watched them depart, but our house-sitting escapade was about to commence. Initially, I had planned to bring my daughter along and have my husband retrieve her at bedtime. However, Sarah adamantly refused, so I abandoned the idea. While I know she enjoys my daughter's company, she remained firm in her decision without offering an explanation. Sensing her disappointment, I'd offered to treat her to a playdate at my house after breakfast the next day, sparking a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. Sarah typically tailors her play to include my daughter, so I brought along some slightly more intricate games and puzzles that adults could also enjoy. As I laid them out, I asked her what she fancied playing. We whiled away the hours engaged in games and cooking dinner together, yet Sarah remained by my side, casting nervous glances around the room. Initially, I attributed her behavior to potential loneliness or lingering nerves from being away from her parents, but even after several hours, her demeanor didn't shift. Concerned, I gently probed if something troubled her, but no matter how many times I inquired, her response remained the same. "No, it's nothing," without divulging further. Sarah's guarded behavior hinted at an unseen apprehension. It wasn't until bedtime approached that I grasped the gravity of her unease. Sarah slipped into her pajamas, a smile adorning her face as she swung open the closet door, and declared her intention to turn in early, planning to head to my house in the morning. To my surprise, nestled within the closet was a bed, its presence catching me off guard. Attempting to make sense of the situation, I watched as Sarah swiftly settled onto the bed, bidding me good night while nudging the door closed. My astonishment spilled out in a raised voice. "Wait, Sarah, are you planning to sleep in there?" Her response, delivered with a solemn expression, affirmed her decision. "Yes, but it's okay. I'll keep it slightly ajar. If anything happens, I'll wake up immediately." Concealing my bewilderment, I extended an invitation for Sarah to join me in my own bed. After some hesitation, she relented and joined me. She explained her desire to keep the bed in the closet as a hiding spot. Though perplexed by her reasoning, I reassured her it was perfectly acceptable. With a bright tone, I queried why she felt the need for a hiding spot. After extracting a promise from me not to chuckle, she leaned in and whispered, "The monster might come." At first, one might assume she was just an innocent child, but the tale she spun shattered any semblance of innocence. Sarah trembled, clinging tightly to my arm. "The monster is terrifying and cunning. It only shows up when Daddy's away. If it appears, Mommy has to fend it off, and I must stay hidden in the closet until she succeeds. Mommy always cries during the struggle." Once, I tried to assist her, but the monster's banging on the closet door scared me so much. I wrapped my arms around Sarah, feeling her tremble against me, and sighed deeply. Perhaps this monster was more than a bedtime tale. It felt too real. The revelation of my sister-in-law's affair, discovered in such an unexpected manner, left me adrift. If the supposed monster was indeed her lover, it wouldn't dare approach this house while she was absent. Yet Sarah firmly believed it targeted days when Daddy was away. As I observed Sarah's vigilance throughout the day, her proximity a shield against potential threats, my heart ached. Considering the gentle soul of my niece and my brother's unwavering trust in his wife, anger swelled within me towards my sister-in-law. But above all, I yearned to offer solace and reassurance to Sarah. I gently clasped Sarah's hand, offering her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Auntie's here today. You mentioned the monster is cunning, right? Well, it'll be caught off guard by a stranger like me and won't dare to come near the house. Besides, your mommy, who the monster always targets, is safe with Daddy right now, so it can't harm her." Despite my attempts to ease her anxiety, Sarah remained clouded with worry, unaware of the monster's true identity. With each passing moment, her apprehension grew, fearing an imminent attack. She suggested we seek refuge together in the closet, prompting me to encourage her to share her concerns about the monster. I hoped that by addressing her fears one by one, she would eventually find peace and drift off to sleep. As I listened to Sarah's distressing revelations, I realized I couldn't simply remain idle. Without hesitating, I whisked her out of the house, disregarding her attire, and swiftly drove us home. Upon arrival, I briefed my husband on the situation and coordinated for him and his friends to spend the night at Sam's house. Around 10 p.m., after my husband and his companions had departed, I received a call from Sam inquiring about Sarah's well-being. "Has Sarah already retired for the night? Don't forget to take care of yourself and your family too. Ensure the house is securely locked. Good night," he advised before bidding farewell. After inquiring about Sarah, Sam urged me to ensure the door was securely locked before retiring for the night. His stern warning resonated deeply, and I fought to steady my voice as I assured him. Once the call ended, I glanced at the peaceful slumber of Sarah and my daughter, steeling myself to confront the lurking menace. The following morning, my husband returned from my brother's house, and my emotions swirled with a mixture of fear and anger as he recounted the events of the previous night. Relief washed over me, knowing my actions had been justified. We spent the remainder of the day at home, anxiously awaiting my brother and his wife's arrival to retrieve Sarah. Upon laying eyes on me, my brother's demeanor shifted to stern interrogation. He demanded to know why Sarah and I had departed his house during the night. "Why didn't you stay put as I instructed? I explicitly warned you not to leave. You claim to understand, so what possessed you to return home on your own?" His accusations left me feeling uneasy, prompting me to question how, while on a trip, he was aware of our absence. Avoiding direct eye contact, he reluctantly confessed, "We provided Sarah with a smartphone equipped with GPS." His revelation contradicted his earlier insistence on not leaving the house during our phone call the previous night. If he had indeed monitored the GPS, he would have easily discerned our departure. Suppressing my urge to confront Sam then and there, I maintained a composed demeanor, mindful not to disturb the children in the adjacent room. "By the way, did you have visitors last night?" My brother's tone shifted, his concern palpable. "Two unfamiliar men showed up at your house late. Who are they? Why would they come to a house that's meant to be occupied only by Sarah and you in the dead of night?" His voice quivered, though not from fear of the unknown intruders, but from a different source altogether. As he spoke, it became evident he was treading cautiously, his eyes darting around. "About those men," I pressed for clarification, but my brother's attempts at evasion were interrupted by his wife, Kate. Whether she was anxious about further discussion or for other reasons, she abruptly called for Sarah and declared they were heading home. As Sarah emerged from another room upon hearing her mother's call, Kate seized her hand with an unmistakable force. Abruptly, Sam's demeanor shifted, his words carrying an abrupt finality. "I can't forgive what happened, but we're leaving today," he declared, urging Sarah to depart the room. Despite my efforts to dissuade them, my brother and his wife remained resolute in their decision to leave. Ignoring my pleas, they pressed on without a backward glance. Witnessing Sarah's resistance to her parents' departure, I swiftly drew her close. "What's going on?" Kate's startled cry echoed as she released Sarah's hand, but I shielded the child behind me, creating a barrier between us and the departing couple. Amidst their hostile tirade, my husband and I stood firm, adamantly refusing to surrender Sarah. As they advanced toward us with fury in their eyes, we managed to usher them out of the room, firmly asserting our stance against allowing Sarah to be taken away. Swiftly, a waiting police officer intervened, promptly detaining the agitated couple. Confusion reigned as the officers attempted to contact my brother and his wife. Sam vehemently insisted to the officer that it was we who should be detained, alleging that we had taken Sarah from her home and were holding her against her will. My sister and her husband have abducted her from her rightful place. Please rescue her swiftly, he implored, despite our protests. Our daughter, emerging from the chaos, sought refuge behind me, engaging Sarah in a bewildered conversation, affirming she was not being held against her will. Sam's stern demand for Sarah to accompany him fell on deaf ears as she clung to my side, paralyzed by her father's towering anger. Kate remained silent beside the officer, casting furtive glances at Sam, hinting at an unspoken message intended for him and Sarah. As the officer restrained Sam, who was causing a scene at the entrance, my husband intervened, holding his smartphone aloft. Sensing the tension, I ushered Sarah and our daughter back into the adjacent room, urging them to close the door to muffle any sounds. With their safety ensured, my husband silently played a video he had recorded in my brother's house the previous night. As the footage unfolded before their eyes, a ghostly pallor washed over the couple's faces, betraying the shock of realization. The video unfolded with eerie precision, capturing the quiet turning of the house key followed by the stealthy entrance of two unknown men, seemingly armed with a duplicate key. Their jovial demeanor upon entering, coupled with mentions of my brother's name, sent shivers down our spines. "You guys are ghosts too, huh?" they quipped, followed by a chilling joke about discounted rates, invoking my familial connection. With smirks etched across their faces, they directed their attention to my husband and his friends. Evading direct inquiries, my husband's friend offered a vague response, prompting one of the men to boast about the sum paid, hinting at a close relationship with my brother and his wife. Their unsettling remarks took a darker turn as they casually mentioned their plans involving Sarah. As the camera caught a glimpse of their profile, a sinister aura emanated, rendering them more villainous than any mere monster. From my vantage point, the screen remained obscured, but the chilling audio alone sent shivers down my spine. Following the playback, my husband's friends wasted no time interrogating the intruders, probing into their frequent visits and habitual pairings. Their inquiries soon turned to Sarah and me, a sense of urgency tainting their tone. My husband's terse admission of our absence seemed to jolt the intruders into reality, realizing the gravity of their situation. With mounting tension, the men made a hasty exit, their hurried departure leaving lingering questions in their wake. Whether they had overlooked my husband's recording until the last moment or deliberately concealed its existence remained unclear. My brother, appearing visibly shaken, vehemently protested his ignorance, clinging to the belief that he was being framed. However, the damning evidence presented in the video, entrusted to me and young Sarah by my brother, shattered any lingering doubts. His feigned ignorance failed to sway anyone, leading to his apprehension by the authorities. Kate, though feigning innocence, found herself under scrutiny as well, her involvement questioned by the officers who had heard Sarah's testimony. Consequently, both Sam and Kate were escorted into custody, their roles in the unfolding drama under intense scrutiny. During the police investigation, Sam and Kate eventually came clean, leading to their arrest. Shockingly, Kate had been orchestrating the lucrative scheme, inviting men to their home while Sam was away at work and profiting from their visits. When she realized there was a demand for children, she exploited Sarah, carefully skirting the law to assist her mother, who was under pressure from unsavory individuals. Innocent Sarah, unaware of the sinister motives, innocently posed for photos which Kate used to entice potential clients. These were innocent snapshots, devoid of any suggestive content, captured with a disposable camera and only lent out to interested parties, never sold. While I detested Kate for her actions initially, it seemed like a matter that didn't directly concern my husband and me. However, things took a darker turn when Sam not only condemned but actively participated in the exploitation, rather than reprimanding his wife or protecting their daughter. So, instead of addressing the issue, Sam decided to expand the operation, recruiting men to become clients, believing that more employees would lead to increased revenue. With this simple yet flawed logic, he devised a plan to involve me in his business. Knowing I would never willingly agree, he resorted to coercion, using the threat of exposing the photos as leverage. Their scheme took a sinister turn when they carefully selected a day when the neighbors were absent, locking both Sarah and me inside their house. Then, without a second thought, they exchanged their house key for a large sum of money and departed on a pre-planned vacation, leaving us behind. Unbeknownst to them, Sarah, who had always dutifully obeyed their commands, chose to reveal the truth in order to protect me. Despite her limited understanding of the conversations, Sarah sensed the danger lurking around us, and she confided in me, unveiling the nightmarish reality of Sam's household. Faced with this revelation, I implored my husband to capture the perpetrator's activities on camera that very night. Their inadvertent disclosure provided crucial evidence for the police, prompting swift action upon my report. Simultaneously, I notified child welfare services to ensure Sarah's safety. From the vantage point of the police bus, we watched as Sam and Kate were apprehended at their doorstep, finally shielding Sarah from their grasp. Despite being first-time offenders, the severity of their crimes, including violations of child welfare and anti-prostitution laws, warranted their imprisonment. The police emphasized the gravity of the situation, particularly the implications of the stored images of the child, which could never be completely eradicated once leaked online. The chilling reality of their actions struck me to the core as the police relayed this information. Fortunately, Kate hadn't digitized or sold the photos of Sarah and had kept them securely stored, averting any potential leaks. It's baffling to comprehend how my once kind and dependable brother Sam could devolve into such a monstrous figure. Until then, our relationship had been characterized by mutual support, making it all the more frightening to realize how deeply he had descended into darkness. Despite their arrests, I still grapple with the enormity of their actions. Following Sam and Kate's apprehension, the authorities also interrogated the other individuals involved. Initially, they attempted to claim innocence, arguing that it was merely an attempted crime. However, the discovery of a child's photograph in their possession and the revelation of additional criminal activities confessed by Sam and Kate during the investigation led to their arrest on multiple charges. After dealing with the monsters and their associates, our next concern was Sarah's well-being. With both her parents unfit for guardianship and no family willing to step in, Child Protective Services decided to remove her from their care. While this was a relief, Sam and I faced the harsh reality that neither of us had parental figures, and Kate's family had severed ties. We discovered that if we couldn't find a suitable guardian within Kate's family, Sarah would be placed in foster care. After much deliberation with my husband, we made the decision to adopt her. Sarah held a special place in my heart, and I couldn't bear the thought of parting ways with her. Thankfully, my husband shared my sentiment, and we saw this as an opportunity to start anew in the countryside, closer to my in-laws. Moving to the countryside not only provided Sarah with stability but also allowed my daughter to spend more time with her grandparents, whom she adored. She was thrilled to have Sarah as her older sister, fulfilling her long-standing wish. Free from the clutches of her parents, Sarah quickly adapted to her new role and environment, embracing a life filled with peace and happiness.
A sense of futility permeated my role as Alex's wife, as the resonance of his demanding voice cut through the clatter of dishes like a sharp knife. "Era, bring me some tea now," he commanded, impatience evident in his incredulous tone. My hand, immersed in soapy water, hesitated. "Hold on, I'm doing the dishes," I responded. His disdainful interruption came swiftly. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" I started to explain, only to be met with a harsh verdict. "What a useless wife you are. Make me some sweet coffee, please." Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, voiced her opinion from the living room, devouring a slice of cake taken from the fridge, her eyes gleaming with malice. A sigh escaped me as I glanced at the towering pile of dishes. "There are so many. Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife." Alex's voice lashed out like a whip, each word stinging. I, Era, a 28-year-old working mother, found myself ensnared in a life that resembled more of a prison than a home. Married at 23, my hope for love and companionship had given way to the overbearing presence of Alex and his demanding mother. Our 4-year-old son remained the sole source of joy in my bleak world. Living in Alex's parents' house, a decision forced upon me after my father-in-law's passing, felt like a perpetual struggle. Initially sympathizing with Mrs. Whitmore's supposed grief, it soon became apparent that I was nothing more than a pawn in her cruel game of domestic tyranny. Cooking, cleaning, working, my efforts were never enough. Meals were either left untouched or criticized harshly. "The stir-fry is so half-hearted," Mrs. Whitmore would scoff. "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd respond, attempting to keep my voice steady. "That's why I hate backtalk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. Their cruelty escalated over time, shifting from harsh words to a chilling silence, ignoring me entirely as if I were a ghost haunting my own home. 5 suffocating years passed, and as Alex and I turned 35 and 33 respectively, the oppressive atmosphere remained unchanged. My mother-in-law, now 63, seemed to thrive on my misery. One evening, as I trudged home from work, a heavy realization settled over me. My existence seemed pointless in their eyes, a shadow unseen and unheard. The only voice that acknowledged me was that of my son, and the thought of losing even that small recognition became unbearable as I returned home. I initiated the cooking process immediately, attempting to push away the gloom that had settled in. I prepared mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a stir-fry with bell peppers and pork, hoping to infuse some semblance of normalcy into our dinner. "Bring me the mayo," Alex abruptly commanded, breaking his long silence. "Sure, here you are," I replied, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not of gratitude or conversation, but a mere order. It proved to be the final straw, the breaking point of my patience and tolerance. The evening took a turn for the worse when Mrs. Whitmore demanded, "Clean the toilet." "What now?" I gasped. "Yes, now," she insisted, her voice dripping with venom. Unable to contain my frustration, I snapped back. "Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty, just like your heart," she hissed. Our argument escalated quickly, with Alex interjecting, demanding I apologize to his mother. However, I refused, standing my ground for the first time in years. The conflict reached its peak, and in that moment, a decision crystallized within me. I needed to escape this toxic environment, not just for my sake, but for my son's as well. Retreating to my room, my resolve hardened. I downloaded divorce papers, filled them out, and slammed them in front of Alex. His shock was palpable, but I felt nothing but a cold determination. "I'm filing these," I declared, my voice steady. Facing my husband's bewildered expression, I realized I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to reclaim my life. The days following my declaration of divorce were a whirlwind of cold glares and biting remarks. However, amidst this storm, I found an unfamiliar sense of liberation. One evening, as I served dinner, Mrs. Whitmore looked at the meal with disdain. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better," she remarked. Biting my tongue, I focused on my son's smiling face, and Alex chimed in sarcastically, "Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke." I sensed the anger simmering within me, yet I maintained my composure. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son," I stated calmly. Mrs. Whitmore snorted dismissively, saying, "Don't act high and mighty. You're just a burden in this house." The tension at the table became palpable, with Alex's attempts to belittle me only intensifying. "So, Era, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life," Alex remarked. I looked him straight in the eye, asserting, "I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son." His smirk faded slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Mrs. Whitmore quickly intervened, saying, "Don't be absurd. You need us more than we need you." The conversation turned to finances, a topic they usually avoided. "You do realize that without my salary, this household would crumble," I stated, more to myself than to them. Mrs. Whitmore scoffed, claiming, "We'll manage. We don't need your pity money." However, Alex's silence spoke volumes. He knew the truth. Without my income, they would be in dire straits. In the following days, their behavior became increasingly erratic. Mrs. Whitmore oscillated between trying to sweet-talk me into staying and hurling insults when I didn't comply. Alex, on the other hand, seemed lost, his arrogant facade crumbling as the reality of his financial dependence became undeniable. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that chilled me to the bone. "She can't leave us like this," Alex hissed. "We need her money." Mrs. Whitmore's reply was cold and calculated. "Don't worry. I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable she won't dare to leave." Hearing their true intentions laid bare was a revelation. They didn't care about me or our son. It was all about control and money. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one, but it wouldn't be fought with words or petty arguments. I would get them where it hurt the most: their pride and their pockets. The next morning, I started putting my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp and renowned woman. "I want a divorce, and I want to make sure they don't get a penny more than they deserve," I told her. She nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "We'll make sure of that. You've been the sole breadwinner, right? We'll use that." As the days passed, my resolve only grew stronger. I embarked on the task of documenting everything: the insults, the financial manipulation, even the smallest grievances. It was time to turn the tables, time for them to face the consequences of their actions. As I built my case, a sense of empowerment filled me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The shadows of discontent were slowly lifting, and in their place, a new dawn was emerging. As the divorce proceedings began, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Yet with each passing day, my sense of fear diminished, replaced by a steely resolve. One evening, Mrs. Whitmore tried a different tactic. "Alara, dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family," her words dripped with insincerity. I met her gaze unwaveringly. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me," I responded. Alex, who had been quietly observing, scoffed. "Oh, playing the victim now. You're not as innocent as you pretend to be." I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice calm. "I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat." The conversation turned, as it often did, to finances. "You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him?" Alex challenged. I smiled, a small, confident curve of my lips. "I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage." Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into a sneer. "You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back." Their words no longer held power over me. I knew my worth, and I knew the truth. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. She laid out the strategy clearly. "We'll expose their financial dependency on you. It will play a crucial role in the custody battle and the division of assets." I nodded, feeling a sense of vindication. The law was on my side, and I was ready to fight back. At home, the tension reached a boiling point. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to undermine me became more desperate. "You think you're so smart," she spat one evening, "but you're just a cold-hearted woman abandoning your family." I looked her straight in the eyes. "No, I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself." "I'm done," I declared. Alex jumped in, his voice laced with venom. "You'll regret this. You can't survive without me." However, his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. As the days went by, my preparations for the court battle intensified. I gathered financial statements, recorded their abusive remarks, and collected evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I was organizing my documents, my son came to me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" His voice was small, uncertain. I pulled him into a hug, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life. Just you and me." His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. I was fighting not just for myself, but for my son's future. The day of the court hearing loomed closer, and with it, a sense of impending freedom. I was ready to face Alex and Mrs. Whitmore, ready to end their reign of control and emotional abuse. I was determined to reclaim my life and give my son the peace and happiness he deserved. It was time for justice, and I was determined to see it served. The day of the court hearing arrived, a day I had been anticipating with a mix of dread and determination. As I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in the courtroom, I felt a sense of surrealism. This was the moment where everything would change. The proceedings began with a cold formality. Alex's lawyer portrayed him as a devoted husband and father struggling under the weight of false accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the part of the grieving mother-in-law wronged by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. However, their performance was transparent, their lies brittle. When my turn came, I spoke clearly, my voice steady. I have been the sole provider for this family for years. My husband's employment and his mother's manipulation have been constant sources of strain. Alex interjected, his voice laced with false hurt. Alara, how can you say these things? I've always supported you. I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. Support is more than just words, Alex. It's about actions, and your actions have shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. The judge listened intently as I presented my evidence. Financial statements, recordings of their verbal abuse, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. The truth was undeniable, and as the evidence mounted, Alex's facade began to crumble. Mrs. Whitmore's composure cracked, her mask of innocence slipping away. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Then came the revelation that sealed their fate. My lawyer presented photographs and documents proving Alex's infidelity and Mrs. Whitmore's illicit affair with a wealthy neighbor, Mr. Harwood. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the images were displayed, showing them in compromising positions. Their deception was laid bare for all to see. Alex's face turned ashen, his eyes wide with shock. Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into one of fury, her hands trembling. You invaded our privacy. Mrs. Whitmore shrieked, her voice shrill. I looked at her, my voice calm but firm. No, I exposed the truth, a truth that you both have been hiding for too long. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Their credibility was shattered, their lies exposed in the harsh light of the courtroom. As the hearing came to a close, the judge's verdict was clear. I was granted full custody of our son, and a fair division of assets was ordered. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with little more than their shattered reputations. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The years of manipulation and emotional abuse were finally over. I had stood up to my oppressors and emerged victorious. The sweetest moment came when my son ran into my arms outside the courthouse, his face bright with relief and happiness. We did it, Mom, he said, his voice filled with joy. Yes, we did, I replied, holding him close. We're free now. It's just the beginning for us. As we walked away hand in hand, I knew that this was not just a victory for me. It was a victory for every person who had ever been made to feel small, powerless, or unworthy. It was a victory for truth and justice, the start of a new chapter filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. The aftermath of the court ruling was immediate and tumultuous. Word of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing their reputations in our small community. They were no longer able to hide behind their facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, societal judgment and consequences awaited them. I concentrated on rebuilding my life with my son, finding solace in the satisfaction that Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I received an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Harwood, the wife of Mr. Harwood, with tearful eyes. Alara, I heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore, did. Her voice broke, and the pain etched on her face was evident. Inviting her in, I offered a cup of tea, and as we sat at the kitchen table, she poured out her heart. I trusted her as a neighbor, as a friend, and to think she was having an affair with my husband, she said. I listened, offering words of comfort. It was clear that Mrs. Whitmore's actions had caused more damage than she had ever anticipated. The next day, I encountered Alex in town. He was a mere shadow of the man he once was, his arrogance replaced by a look of defeat. "Alara, please, can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stopped, facing him. "What is there to talk about, Alex?" He fidgeted, unable to meet my eyes. "I am sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, on your strength." His apology, though late, was a testament to the shift in power. He had lost everything: his dignity, his home, his family. In that loss, he had finally recognized his own faults. However, it was Mrs. Whitmore who faced the harshest backlash. Her affair with Mr. Harwood had not only ruined her reputation, but had also led to legal troubles. Mrs. Harwood had filed for divorce and was pursuing a lawsuit against her for alienation of affection. I heard about Mrs. Whitmore's plight from neighbors, the whispers and rumors painting a picture of a woman undone by her actions. She had become an outcast, shunned by those she had once considered friends. One afternoon at the grocery store, our paths crossed, and for a moment, our eyes met. The look of resentment and defeat in her eyes was unmistakable. "You did this to me," she hissed under her breath as she passed by. I watched her go, feeling a mix of pity and vindication. "No, Sylvia, you did this to yourself," I whispered to myself. The tides of justice had turned, and the consequences of their actions were now inescapable. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were living a life they had crafted through years of deceit and manipulation, and as I watched them struggle with the aftermath, I knew that the best revenge was living well, free from their toxic influence. Turning my focus back to my son and our new life, I realized that this was not just a story of revenge. It was a story of liberation. It was about breaking free from the chains of abuse and control. As I looked to the future, I knew that the best was yet to come. My upbringing took a sharp turn from the very beginning, as my parents, facing financial constraints and harboring disappointment over my gender, decided to put me up for adoption when I was just a child. Growing up in a modest household with two older sisters, life was far from idyllic. We resided in a quaint ancestral home in a small town, relying on the support of my grandparents' farm for a significant portion of our sustenance. My father, a truck driver, was often away, returning home every few days, while my mother worked as a waitress. Being the unplanned third child, I discovered the unwelcome circumstances of my arrival as I matured. My parents had initially contemplated getting rid of me, but medical concerns dissuaded them. Moreover, my mother's desire for another daughter led to disappointment when I, a boy, arrived. Growing up, my small-town existence became colored by the embarrassment of being dressed in my sister's discarded clothes, a consequence of my mother's practicality in reusing outfits. School became a challenging environment where I faced ridicule for wearing a girl's uniform and sporting long hair. Complaints only resulted in punishment from my mother. As I navigated childhood, I absorbed a constant stream of abuse and harsh words from my parents. My father's sporadic presence offered little solace, as he fluctuated between a neutral stance and moments of cruelty akin to my mother. My resentment grew as I realized my sisters consistently received the best while I got their leftovers. Rebellion became my coping mechanism, a response to the injustices I perceived. I wasn't a saintly child. I directed my frustration towards my parents, holding them responsible for my misery. Grounded and left to fend for myself, I faced the struggles of a 6-year-old grappling with an unjust reality. A pivotal moment occurred when severe bullying in the playground pushed me to the brink. Upon discovering my sister's new holiday clothes, I succumbed to a fit of frustration, cutting them into confetti. While I regret my actions, they stemmed from a place of pain rather than malice. Instead of understanding my turmoil, my parents deemed it a sin deserving the harshest punishment. They decided to put me up for adoption. Despite waiting for a month, no one stepped forward to take me in. The frustration that followed was directed at me, reinforcing the narrative of my perceived worthlessness. In the midst of it all, I overheard my mother expressing how unwanted I was, further deepening the wounds of rejection. I often find myself pondering the wish that I had undergone a gender check, a step that might have spared me from being brought into a world where my parents harbored such intense hatred for me. It's disheartening to bear the weight of their disdain, especially for a reason beyond my control. After a considerable period with no takers for my adoption, my parents began discussing the situation with friends and relatives. Dad happened to know someone in the neighboring town, a man running a food van with his wife. Though they were economically less fortunate than us, their desire for a child had remained unfulfilled for over a decade. Dad approached them, and without hesitation, they agreed to adopt me. The moment Dad broke this news to Mom and my sisters is etched in my memory. Their joy at the prospect of getting rid of me was palpable. Dad, however, provided a disclaimer about their financial limitations, suggesting that I might not be able to attend school. Mom, nonchalant, dismissed it, urging Dad to drop me off the next day. I stood at the corner, holding the curtain, torn between my disdain for my family and the fear and hurt of leaving them. Tears welled up, but I kept them silent. The excitement of my family overshadowed my presence. When Dad finally noticed my tears, he offered a comforting pat on my back, instructing me to pack my belongings as we would leave for my new family the next morning. Though my heart screamed, the cries went unnoticed. I packed, hoping my new family would be kinder. The next day, Dad drove me to the neighboring town. The emotions during that journey remain a blur, a numbness that enveloped me. My new family, indeed financially modest, had a tiny house with one room. They had converted a storehouse into my living space. It was small, but at least I had a room, a luxury I never enjoyed before. My belongings found a home in a tiny closet at the corner. My new parents, Mary and John, greeted me with warmth and affection, qualities unfamiliar to me, coming from a disturbed household. Doubts lingered, and I resisted getting attached, fearing another abandonment. It took months for me to realize that their love was genuine. Despite discontinuing school that year due to the mid-session move, they promised to enroll me the following year. Witnessing their relentless efforts to save money for my education endeared them to me. In time, I reciprocated their love. My adoption, initially viewed as a curse, turned out to be a blessing. My biological parents never reappeared, allowing me to embrace my true identity as a boy. Mary and John, diligent and hardworking, devoted 14 to 16 hours a day to their food truck, located just outside their modest apartment. During the times when John and Mary were engrossed in their work, I wasn't left to fend for myself. Through my bedroom window, I had a clear view of their activities. Gradually, I found myself spending my days on the food truck, lending a hand wherever I could. When I entered school, my focus shifted to studies, yet I continued aiding them with chores during my free moments. By the age of 10, I was assisting John at the cash counter, showcasing an early proficiency in calculations. Business and accounting became familiar territories for me. Post-high school, a burning desire to run their business full-time emerged within me. However, both John and Mary insisted that I complete my college education first. They generously funded my studies, recognizing the need for formal education. As they aged and grew frail, I yearned to assume their responsibilities as they had done for me. Still, they reassured me they could manage for a few more years and urged me to pursue higher education. My college focus was on business and accounting, driven by my ultimate aspiration to become an entrepreneur. Graduation day marked a pinnacle of joy, with John and Mary celebrating as if over the moon. Despite inviting my biological parents to the convocation, they failed to attend. Post-college, my eagerness to take over the food van and allow John and Mary to retire clashed with their plans for me. Accumulating substantial savings, they handed it over to me, encouraging me to start my own business. Overwhelmed by their gesture, I hesitated to blindly spend the money. Drawing upon my business acumen, I scouted for a struggling local eatery in a prime location. After numerous rejections, I secured a lease on a profit-sharing model. Starting from scratch, I revamped the place and menu to cater to the tastes of millennials and Gen Z. By providing exceptional services, sales soared, yielding a twofold profit on the initial investment within a year. 4 years into this venture, I now proudly oversee 3 successful cakes in town. I upgraded John and Mary to a better apartment while securing a modest place for myself. Despite urging them to retire the food truck for their happiness, they insisted on continuing. Leaving their house with a suitcase, I never envisioned myself as a college graduate. Yet here I am, running flourishing restaurant chains in town. Fast forward to last month, a routine day at work turned extraordinary when I spotted a familiar face at the cash counter of one of my restaurants. It felt like encountering a ghost. My biological father, absent for almost 2 decades. Despite the presence of customers, I said nothing, leading him to a quiet corner. His appearance stirred up the haunting memories of my tumultuous childhood. The detailed account of my past wouldn't have unfolded if my biological parents hadn't reappeared in my life. He expressed immense happiness and pride in witnessing my success, leaving me speechless and numb. According to him, he had met John, who shared the news of my prosperous venture while passing by. He mentioned plans to bring my mom over for the weekend. Uncertain of how to respond, I remained silent, and he departed shortly after. Later that day, I approached John, expressing my reluctance to meet my biological parents, who had disowned me for being a boy. I harbored memories of a distressing childhood and contemplated running away for the weekend. Mary insisted on forgiveness and moving forward, urging me to meet them. Reluctantly, I agreed, setting the condition that Mary and John be present during the encounter. On the arranged weekend, my biological parents arrived at John's house. Instead of an apology, they displayed no remorse, focusing on counting the favors they believed they had bestowed upon me. My mother asserted that I should be thankful for finding good parents in John and Mary, who had raised me to be successful. Despite my inner turmoil, Mary's reassuring hand gesture prompted me to diplomatically express gratitude for having them as my parents. The meeting felt awkward, leaving me unsettled. The next day, a call from my mother, whose voice I hadn't recognized in 2 decades, unveiled a demand for money. She explained their financial struggles, detailing Dad's job loss and her own challenges in securing employment as a 50-year-old waitress. Facing mounting pressure from friends to repay borrowed money, she sought $20,000 to cover essential expenses. Though I promised to consider it, doubts lingered about their sincerity. Despite my reservations and conflicted feelings, I eventually discussed the situation with Mary and John. While Mary expressed happiness at my willingness to help, she advised caution. John, sharing my concerns, feared potential emotional exploitation. After much contemplation, I decided to take a gamble and transfer the money to her account, hoping to assist my family in need. Contrary to my initial sense of accomplishment, a week later, my mother called again, leaving me with mixed feelings about their intentions and the financial help I provided. She expressed her gratitude for the assistance and then mentioned that my sisters were eager to meet me. In that moment, I sensed a genuine desire from my family to reconnect. Despite the wrongs my parents had committed during my childhood, I harbored no ill feelings towards my sisters. As a small child, I may have done some mischievous things, but as I grew up, I never held them responsible. I even entertained the thought that my parents might have let me go due to financial struggles rather than malice. When Mom suggested meeting on the upcoming Sunday and I offered to drive home, she proposed an alternative, meeting somewhere outside. I agreed without dwelling too much on it. After the call, a sense of uneasiness lingered. Why didn't she want me to visit home? Meeting family after so many years? Wouldn't it be more natural to call them home instead of opting for a restaurant? Nevertheless, she sent me the details of the restaurant, and it turned out to be one of the fanciest in town. At that moment, my focus was on the fact that they didn't invite me home. I joined them at the restaurant, and the reunion with my sisters brought a momentary sense of happiness. However, when the menu arrived, they began ordering the priciest items, seeking the most expensive dishes. When my father remarked, "Order the most expensive one," my son is a big man now, it felt mean-spirited and wicked. As they indulged in the lavish feast, I found myself footing the bill, a situation that left me contemplating wild thoughts like ghosting them before settling it. However, that seemed too severe. I resolved not to fall into their emotional trap again, sitting coldly through the rest of the evening. They didn't seem to notice my detachment. As they left, there was no invitation to visit home. Instead, my elder and sister inquired about the next dining destination. I faked a smile, bid them goodbye, and returned home to share my experience with Mary. Mary, a kind and independent woman, found their behavior disturbing. She advised me not to be a fool, not to dwell on them, and to focus on my own life. I heeded her counsel, not responding to my sisters or mother when they called. After 2 months of silence, it appeared they got the hint that I didn't want them in my life. In the subsequent update, I acknowledged the support and shared my decision to stop responding to my sisters and biological parents, realizing they seemed interested only in money. However, after 5 months, my mother called again, attempting small talk that felt fake and insincere. When she eventually disclosed that my sisters had to drop out of college due to financial struggles and asked me to fund their education, I couldn't contain my frustration. Despite her plea for help, I remained firm in my decision to distance myself from their intentions. I was at work during that call and wanted to keep a clear head, so I decided to hang up. However, she persisted, calling again in the evening. Initially ignoring her calls, I realized that avoidance wasn't a solution. The next time she called, I answered. She immediately delved into discussing my sister's eagerness to rejoin college and inquired about my payment plan, whether in a lump sum or semester-wise. She suggested transferring the entire amount to her, and she would handle the tuition before each semester. I interrupted her, expressing my reluctance to make any payments. To her surprise, I firmly stated that I had no intention of contributing. She inquired about the refusal, suggesting installment payments, but I reiterated my stance, emphasizing that my elder sister's education wasn't my responsibility, particularly given my parents' abandonment. I pointed out the opportunistic nature of their sudden interest in me due to my financial standing. This incited her anger, and she retorted that I owed them for bringing me into the world, asserting my duty to care for them. Although I had much to say, my words fell on deaf, narcissistic ears. I acknowledged my gratitude to my actual parents, John and Mary, who had earned the titles of mom and dad through their love and care. In contrast, my biological parents had no place in my life. They had discarded me at the age of 6. As she hurled abuses, I simply responded with the wrong number and hung up. Regardless of how I may be labeled, I refused to squander my hard-earned money on a so-called family that had abandoned me. Addressing a comment from the previous updates about calling John and Mary by their names instead of mom and dad, I clarified that I indeed referred to them as mom and dad. The usage of names in the narrative was for the sake of storytelling. John and Mary, my true parents, held a special place in my heart. As for my biological parents, they didn't exist for me. Moving on to the next story, I discovered my wife's infidelity with someone she met at a convention. We had shared a love for all things nerdy, bonded over gaming, anime, and conventions. However, despite our seemingly strong connection, I unearthed her betrayal and took decisive action. 5 years into our marriage, the foundation we had built on mutual interests and passions seemed solid. We both reveled in nerdy activities, from gaming to discussing the latest chapters of manga like Legend of Zelda and One Piece. Our love for each other grew rapidly, leading to a fast-tracked marriage. Our wedding, brimming with nerdy charm, celebrated our shared interests. Due to work constraints and financial considerations, attending conventions had become a rare occurrence for us. Wanting to make our 5-year anniversary special, I decided to surprise her with tickets to a renowned Comic-Con. It was a dream event for many enthusiasts, and her joy upon receiving the surprise was palpable. However, this seemingly idyllic scenario took an unexpected turn. I always struggled to gauge women's interest, often realizing it only in hindsight. This pattern persisted even with my wife, as it took 3 extensive conversations on Discord for me to grasp her feelings and desire to know me better. When we attended a convention together, things seemed enjoyable. A woman dressed as slave Princess Leia complimented my stormtrooper costume, which I hastily put together. Unaware of her advances, my wife, noticing the attention, expressed her frustration at my obliviousness. As the convention unfolded, we joined a meetup where a guy, dressed as Han Solo, engaged in conversation with my wife, also portraying Princess Leia. Their interaction intensified, causing me to step in and mention my role as the husband. Although he acknowledged me politely, he avoided eye contact. Confronting my wife later, she insisted there was nothing amiss, attributing his friendliness to a shared interest in Star Wars. Believing her, I brushed off the incident. The next day, my wife fell ill, prompting me to leave and return later with a gift. However, she grew distant, responding minimally to messages. Concerned, I approached our room, hearing unsettling sounds upon arrival. Dismissing it as my wife's activities, I entered to find her seemingly guilty. Confronting her revealed nothing, and I chose to overlook the incident. The convention ended, but our relationship strained. She worked longer hours, became distant, and avoided spending time together. Suspicious, I noticed her Discord notifications were off, a deviation from our usual communication. Curiosity led me to check her phone, discovering messages from the guy she met at the Star Wars meetup. The exchange involved flirtatious messages, photo sharing, and even discussions about role-playing. Suppressing my anger, I pretended ignorance when she inquired about my well-being. Internally seething, I decided to research divorce options, contemplating a way to expose her betrayal and make her aware of my knowledge. I informed her about an upcoming convention, explaining that I couldn't attend but she was welcome to go. Despite the excitement in her eyes, the realization hit me: my partner, the person I wanted to spend my life with, had discarded me. It was a devastating blow, but I concealed my emotions. On the day of the convention, I executed my plan after researching the guy she had been closely working with. Wearing a mask to conceal my identity, I located them right in front of her favorite voice actors. Observing them closely, I watched as they got in line. When they approached the voice actors, she pulled the man closer, sharing a kiss. That's when I intervened, removing the mask and confronting her. She questioned my actions, and I accused her of cheating with him, presenting the Discord messages as evidence. The onlookers were shocked by the public confrontation, but I refused to let it go. I publicly declared her as a cheater, exposing her affair with the guy she had met at a convention. The celebrity present decided to take a break and left the scene, leaving my wife in tears, pleading for understanding. However, I remained resolute, citing her lies about going alone and uncovering her secret meetings and late nights at the office. Seeking solace in my decision, I refused to listen to her explanations. Upon returning home, I gathered my belongings, stayed at a hotel, and initiated contact with an attorney for divorce proceedings. Despite her attempts to convince me to embrace an open relationship, I remained steadfast in wanting only her. My actions gained attention on social media as someone recorded and shared the embarrassing confrontation. Proceeding with the divorce, I obtained the house and belongings, eventually selling them to escape the painful memories. Uninterested in her fate, the nerd community widely discussed the incident, creating a significant buzz on platforms like Twitter. Her boss eventually discovered the situation, but my focus shifted towards my ongoing quest for love, steering clear of a relationship